Really happy to see how many people showed up here at Ansible London. I heard more than 500. It's even, as far as I remember, even more than we had in San Francisco in November, back in November, so really happy to see that. And at the same time, I'm really excited to be here. And I thank Ansible folks to give us the opportunity to be here and show what Cisco has done on the automation side and what Ansible has done in order to leverage whatever Cisco put in place on the programmability automation side of the house. And to share with you, it's been a little challenge to be here today, and very simple reason. This week, Cisco is having his biggest European event in Berlin, where 12,000 people are there to meet with customers, with Cisco, sharing whatever Cisco is doing. So it's been a little challenge, but at the same time, we didn't want to lose the opportunity to be here in Ansible Fest and share with you what we have done. Before I start, let me introduce myself. I'm Fabrizio Maccioni. I'm a technical marketing engineer in Cisco. I started my career back in the late 90s as a software developer, coding in assembly, C and C++ for ST Microelectronics in the operating system teams. Then I moved to Cisco in California as a software developer on the Catalyst 6500 platform. Moved back after 4 years to Italy, Sardinia, in my place, where I was a data center network and security manager in charge of operations of a big internet service provider. How many of you recall the service provider Tiscali? We had operations in UK as well. I think, as far as I remember, we sold it to Carphone, and now it's TalkTalk, as far as I remember. We were running operations for 12 countries around Europe from the data center that I was managing from Sardinia. And then 2 years ago, I decided to move back to California, joining again Cisco as a technical market engineer, where I'm focused on programmability automation, mainly in the data center, but we are starting working also on the campus and the service provider programmability automation as well. This is the objective of this session. This is the abstract that we publish in the Ansible Fest website. But essentially, what I'm going to share is what Cisco have done to enable, which technology we have put in place to enable programmability automation on Nexus devices, what Ansible has done. It's a great job that Peter and his team has done on the networking side. Very interesting topic and a very interesting session we had this morning. At the same time, I only have half an hour, so I don't have a lot of time to cover everything, and there are some non-objective. For sure, I'm not here to explain you guys what Ansible is. I'm not here to sell any Cisco gear, and it's not a deep dive on the modules. It's more an overview of what Cisco and Ansible have done in this topic. So briefly, the agenda. I'll try to explain which are the problems that we are trying to solve, an overview of Cisco and Ansible, and which are the technology that enables on the Cisco devices to program and automate the networking devices. To follow with which were the two different approaches to automate with Cisco before Ansible 2.0 and after, which are the different, which are the procedure that we had to follow in order to start automating the Nexus devices. And at the very end, I'll provide some references about which are some of the joint initiatives that Ansible and Cisco are delivering on this space. Starting with what's the problem that we are trying to solve. This is a quote from one system administration that as a data center network manager, I've heard so many times from a system administrator why it takes minutes to deploy a server, and it takes sometimes hours, but could be even days or weeks to apply the related configuration to that networking device. Why is that, right? And we all know that all the companies that have started using configuration management tools and automate their server, they have improved with big numbers the frequency in which they deploy. They are more faster, they reduce the lead times, and there are less failures because there are less manual intervention, right? So instead of doing like this guy, facing backwards and pretending that the problem is not there, Cisco started working on some of the technology in order to enable, again, the automation on the networking side and not only on the server side. So many companies like you have already started using configuration management tools for deploying the compute, the application, and the service system. But the bottleneck most of the time is the network. So where we want to move is something like this, where we'll streamline the whole process and leverage Ansible to deploy in a very seamless way all the chain from the compute to the services. Okay? And one of the reasons is that even the networks are changing. For years, we as Cisco has provided guidelines how to build the networks with the usual 3 tiers, or sometimes even more tiers with the core, aggregation or distribution, and the access. But most of the new network infrastructure, especially in the data center side, are moving towards different kind of architecture that we call spine and leaf, which are the closed architecture, where one of the main differences is that at the aggregation level, you can have more than 2 devices. You can have a lot of devices at the aggregation level, and you can have hundreds or even thousands of access switches that we call leaf. And on the leaf layer, we have 2 or more devices that are in charge of layer 3, gateways capabilities, inter-VLAN, routing traffic, or even services like load balancing, firewall, and so on. And the main point here is that the network are growing. And the number of devices in the modern architecture can be, as I said, hundreds of thousands. We have a massive scale data center with 1,000 of devices. So scale and consistency are key there. And the tools like Ansible are very key in order to drive scale and consistency at the same time. So the Cisco and Ansible better together story is to leverage one Ansible server in order to configure not only the server side, the application, but also to configure using different profiles, of course, all the network infrastructure as well, okay, to streamline the process all the way through. Brief overview, which are about the technology that we as Cisco have put in place to leverage the programmability automation. And one of the questions why sometimes they ask why you have started working with Ansible, so why Ansible? And everybody talked about Ansible lately, so it must be cool, right? But just to share with you, I recently went to a Docker training, and they were showing some statistics about the usage of Dockers and Docker's infrastructure. And one of the questions was related to the survey that they did like a year ago with like 400, 500 customers. They were asking which were the orchestration container they were considering to use. And most of the people there were expecting the usual names, so the Docker Swarm, Kubernetes, and Mesos. Most of the people at the class were pretty amazed that more or less the same number of customers were considering to use Ansible instead. So not the usual names in the orchestration on the containers and on the Docker side, but Ansible for many of them looks like is a good choice. So they're most likely going to deploy Ansible and then Dockers at the same time. And the usual benefits of Ansible, it's streamlined, it's fast, people like YAML because it's very easy, and the documentation is really good. In my point of view, the 3 main reasons why Ansible are agentless, agentless, agentless. Agentless infrastructure, it's very important in the server environment, but in the networking side, it's huge. Networking people usually are very, very conservative. They don't like the idea to have agents running on the box. They don't like the idea to have a third-party software running on the box. And sometimes they run even an issue with the compliance. The way in which the Ansible works in the network devices is slightly different than in the server administration, where in the server you have the usual Python script that gets pushed and executed on the server. In the network side, in the Nexus devices, the devices that we use in the data center, we push CLIs instead. And we can do it either with the SSH or with REST APIs. And I'll show you some details around that. So that's the main difference between the two. And one of the main Cisco technology enables are the REST API that we call NX API. And if you are a network administrator and you want to start automating, and you are in your usual workplace, that I'm sure it looks something like that, right? And you want to start automating. You want to start trying to automate, and what we advise most of the time is don't try to automate everything, right? Try to automate something very simple, get comfortable, and then build on top of it. So let's suppose that you want to just check whether the clock on all the devices is configured properly. What you do, you just configure the feature NX API that in turn will start a web server on the Nexus device, which is a Linux-based operating system. And at that point, you can interact with the box just using REST APIs. So you can do it either with XML or JSON. And for instance, if you want to get the clock, the time from the device, you just push a very simple post script, in this case with the JSON RPC, and you get a JSON output reply. Very easy. And in order to let the network administrator to start playing with the NX API, we also provide a sandbox built in on the switch. You just need to enable it. And what we'll do, if you just go in the browser and you type the IP address of the device, and you provided the standard credential, username and password that you'll use for SSH to the box, you'll get this nice view where you can type the CLIs on the upper pane, and you can see right away which would be the post verb that you should post and you should send over HTTP or HTTPS to the box. And on the right side, if you can see which is the output that you'll get from the box. And also, very, very powerful and very handy for many customers that are starting playing with that. You can even generate a Python script. Python script that you can run in an external server. All you need to do is change the information that I've highlighted there. So changing IP address, username and password, or you can use SSH keys if you don't want to have your username and password right there on the script. We also introduced the concept of objects, where an object stores both the configuration and the states of a given feature. Feature being an interface, being a protocol, being a VRF, being any feature that you can find in a Nexus device. And the beauty of that is that the way in which you interact with the box is not through CLI anymore, but through object. So whenever you want to change the configuration of the box, you'll send through post the REST APIs the object with all the information and all the configuration that you want to change. Or if you want to get the information from the box, you just get the object itself. So the way in which you communicate with the device is different. And if you want to be notified whenever a change occurs to the object, you just subscribe. So the standard REST APIs. And especially the last one, the monitor is huge, because instead of polling the device constantly through CLIs or through the standard SNMP, you just subscribe that to the object, and whenever there is a change in either configuration or state, you get notified. And that's huge, especially if you have a very large infrastructure. So just to give you an example, we provide a unique URL for every object. So let's suppose you want to configure or you want to get the configuration or state of a BGP peer. What you'll do, you'll just use the URL at the bottom with the IP address of the peer, and you get or you configure the state and configuration of the BGP peer. Or for an interface, it would look something like this. So very easy. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see the website where we post all the information about which are the modules, which are the fields in the module. So that gets very easy to configure and to start playing with the box and starting and really automate with the box. This is a graphical representation of the different way in which you can interact with a Nexus device. And at the bottom, you'll find the object store with all the objects that I was mentioning before. And on top of the standard SNMP and netconf, we added the NX API, CLI, and the REST API that I just shown to you. In the networking space, there is a huge discussion about open configuration, open models, and so forth, with OpenConfig and IETF being the two bodies that at the moment are working actively in this space. Maybe with OpenConfig a little have done more work on this space compared to IETF. And our approach in Cisco is to provide native access to our objects that we call DMEs. And whenever the standards, OpenConfig, IETF, or whatever standard will come to play later on, we are going to provide a shim layer so that outside will provide an infrastructure and APIs to use whatever OpenConfig and open models you want to use. And internally, we are going to convert to the native ones. Okay? So in this way, we can provide the different interfaces for different customers and different use cases. Now let's move with how would you use Ansible before all the work that Ansible has done in 2.0 release. So what you need to do is to install a third-party Python library. You would download the modules, and you'd follow a very simple instruction that are in the GitHub, in the same GitHub repository that the modules are stored. And you can start playing with some playbooks. So the number of modules that were available, it's explained here, and there are some more modules that we are working on. And as you can see, it's a very comprehensive set of modules. But for those configuration or those particular caveats where the modules cannot cover your use case, you can always use the command module, where you can push CLIs in a very easy way. So a playbook using the before Ansible 2.0 version would look something like this, where you use the Cisco VLAN, NX API at the very bottom, when you will make sure that the VLAN is present, the VLAN name and the ID. You'll run the playbook, and sure enough, if you check the configuration on the box, the VLAN is configured. It's very, very straightforward, like in any other playbook, right? As we've seen this morning, Ansible have added new modules, new core modules to Ansible 2.0, and we are trying to leverage whatever Ansible has done. So let's see which are these modules. Modules are NXOS config, NXOS command, NXOS template, and if you guys were here this morning, Peter explained you where these modules are, right? So you can change the configuration given a complete text file, or you can change the configuration line by line. It depends on you, or a mix of the two, right? And we have two different kind of transport. Could be SSH, or could be the NX API, the REST API that I was explaining you guys before. And they will translate in CLI or NX API transport whenever you write the playbook. And there are a ton of very useful options, like the delegate to reuse a jump host if you don't want to, for any reason, compliance, or because you prefer to, you don't want to let the operator to run the playbooks straight to the box, but you want to use a jump host, or wait for force. There are so many very useful options that you can leverage. This is a specific session for data centers to the Nexus devices, but Ansible has added the modules also for the iOS devices. So the modules that you are going to use will be iOS instead of NXOS. And consider that there are no REST API in the iOS space yet, you don't find the iOS, you won't find the NX API transport there, right? So you'll be limited from that standpoint. But they are there, and you can leverage that. So if you remember the sequence of installing the third-party Python library, getting the repo, the modules from the GitHub repository, this is not needed anymore, right? So you just have the core modules. You can start playing with the modules from day zero. And this website, you can see which are the playbooks that Ansible is using to test the networking modules. And it's a very easy way to start playing with the playbooks in the networking in the Nexus for the Nexus devices. An example, if you wanna, let's suppose that you are starting automating and you wanna leverage an XAPI. First of all, what you need to do is enable an XAPI itself. So what you can do is just using SSH to the box in order to enable the feature itself on the Nexus device. And this is how a simple playbook would look like. So an XOS, you go in configuration mode with the feature an XAPI. Let it run, and sure enough, an XAPI will be enabled in all the box. And that's very easy, just to give an example of how you could leverage the NXOS command playbooks and modules. So as I said at the very beginning, the goal is to streamline the entire process from the compute, application, networking, and services so that we can have a very streamlined process and accelerate the application deployment. In the end, some reference to some joint initiative between Ansible and Cisco, starting with some website where we store most of the information on the Ansible website, GitHub, or Cisco. And if you go to the developer.cisco.com, this is the place where in Cisco we store all the information about whatever is related to programmability automation. So you'll find sandbox, you'll find the labs, you'll find the trainings, everything that is related to automation, not only on the Nexus devices, but across all the Cisco platforms. And in the end, some references. There were, Peter this morning was references to the press release where Red Hat announced what they've done in DevOps space with Ansible. We are coming up with a Cisco and Ansible webinar in March. The other point would be that the Cisco is working in order to update the modules that I showed you before, that they've been written using the third-party library, right? So we are going very shortly to update those modules so that they can be leveraged the core Ansible core modules, so that it will be easier to start with them. You don't need to do anything. Just install the latest version of Ansible, and you'll be good to go. And we are working with them with many different initiatives, so stay tuned. We'll have more information soon.